There are moments in life when everything seems to collapse at once. A diagnosis arrives with words you never wanted to hear. A relationship you trusted falls apart. A job that gave you a sense of purpose is suddenly taken away. Or perhaps the collapse is less visible on the outside, but no less real. A silent depression, an emptiness of meaning, a slow drifting away from everything that once made sense. In such seasons, the question arises almost unbidden. When everything falls apart, where is God? Is He watching from a distance? Is He indifferent? Is He punishing? Or has He simply never been there at all? If this reflection is meaningful to you, consider subscribing to the channel, liking this video, and leaving a brief comment to share your thoughts and experiences. This question is not trivial, and it is not new. It has been asked in hospital corridors and at gravesides, in quiet bedrooms late at night, in prison cells and refugee camps, in offices after a sudden dismissal, in churches that feel strangely silent. It has been whispered by those who once believed confidently but now find their faith fractured. It has been cried out loud by those who never believed but now find themselves, against their own expectations, calling on a God they are not even sure exists. Wherever there is human suffering, this question seems to follow. If God is real and good, why does He seem absent when we need Him the most? One of the first steps in approaching this question is to recognize that our expectations of God deeply shape how we interpret His apparent presence or absence. Many people, often without realizing it, carry within themselves an image of God as a kind of cosmic problem solver, whose primary role is to prevent pain, secure success, and shield them from the unpredictabilities of life. When reality refuses to align with this expectation, when suffering comes and remains, faith can feel as though it has been betrayed. The heart cries out, "If God loved me, this would not be happening." Yet, the spiritual tradition of many centuries presents a more complex and ultimately more profound picture. In the sacred texts and stories that have nurtured faith across generations, God does not promise to spare human beings from every valley of shadow. Instead, He promises His presence in the valley. The Psalms, for example, are not a collection of simplistic praises sung from a place of comfort and ease, but a tapestry woven with cries of anguish, confusion, and even protest. My God, why have you forsaken me?" is not a blasphemous accusation from an unbeliever. It is a line of prayer from Scripture itself and later, the cry of Jesus on the cross. This does not resolve the mystery, but it does tell us something important. Feeling abandoned by God is not proof that God is absent. It is part of the human experience of faith, preserved and honored within the very heart of the sacred tradition. When everything collapses, most people do not first need a philosophical argument. They need to know whether they are alone. The silence of God can be agonizing, because it confronts us with our own vulnerability, our inability to control events, our finiteness. In those moments, many assume one of two positions. Some choose resignation, deciding that God must not exist, or if He exists, He must not care. Others cling to quick explanations. This happened for a reason. It is a test. God never gives more than you can handle. These statements are often made with good intentions, but when spoken too quickly into deep pain, they can sound hollow, even cruel. They seem to bypass the depth of suffering instead of entering into it. A more honest path begins with acknowledging the full weight of what has been lost. Faith, at its most mature, does not work by denying reality or forcing the heart to smile through tears. It allows lament. It permits tears. It makes room for unanswered questions and unfinished sentences. There are moments when the only authentic prayer is a groan, a sigh, or even silence. And yet, in that very place of unadorned honesty, something subtle can begin to happen. The very act of crying out, "Where are you?" presupposes at some level that there is someone to address. The question itself, asked in sincerity, becomes a fragile but real form of relationship. Consider a person who has just lost a loved one unexpectedly. The routines of daily life are shattered. The future that once seemed clear is now an unknown landscape. In the first days and weeks, there may be little sense of God's presence, only numbness and disorientation. Well-meaning friends might say, "God is with you," but those words may land as vague, distant, or even irritating. Yet, as time passes, small details may begin to stand out. An unexpected visit from a friend exactly when the loneliness felt unbearable, a quiet strength that made it possible to get through a difficult conversation, a moment of deep consolation during a simple, wordless prayer. These moments do not erase the pain, nor do they explain everything that has happened. But they gently bear witness to a presence that did not vanish when the world seemed to fall apart. It is often in retrospect that people are able to perceive that God was near them precisely when they felt most abandoned. This does not mean that suffering is an illusion, or that the darkness was not real. Rather, it suggests that God's way of being present is often less about miraculous intervention from outside and more about an intimate, sustaining companionship from within. The absence of spectacular rescue does not necessarily mean the absence of care. Many who have endured profound trials testify later that they discovered a depth of inner resilience, a new sensitivity to the suffering of others, or a quieter but stronger faith they did not possess before. They did not receive all the answers they wanted, but they encountered, slowly and sometimes almost imperceptibly, a God who did not abandon them to their pain. This does not resolve the scandal of suffering, and any attempt to give a neat explanation to every tragedy is bound to ring false. Some losses are so devastating that they mark a life forever, no matter how much healing takes place. The goal is not to force a bright meaning onto dark experiences, as though everything that happens is secretly good if we only look closely enough. There are events that are simply evil, unjust, or tragic. To pretend otherwise is to do violence to reality and to the people who suffer. Yet even in those darkest of places, the testimony of faith insists that God can work in ways that do not justify the evil, but that bring forth something new from the ruins, like a seed that germinates only after passing through fire. One way to understand this is through the image of companionship. Imagine a child facing a painful medical procedure. The parent cannot simply remove the necessity of the procedure without endangering the child's life, but refuses to abandon the child to suffer alone. The parent takes the child's hand, remains in the room, shares the tension and tears, and offers comfort that does not eliminate the pain but transforms how it is experienced. The analogy is limited, as all human analogies about God are, but it helps illustrate a point. The presence of love does not always mean the absence of suffering, but it does mean that suffering is no longer endured in isolation. When we ask, "Where is God when everything collapses?" one possible answer is, He is closer than we think, especially when we do not feel Him. He may be hidden in the people who come to our side, in the inner strength that surprises us, in the quiet hope that refuses to be extinguished, in the simple gestures of kindness that appear like small lights in a dark night. He may also be present in the very act of our persevering, of choosing to continue, to love, to seek truth and goodness even when the reasons are not clear. Faith does not always grant the sensation of God's nearness, but it anchors itself in the conviction that God's character is trustworthy, even when his ways are beyond our understanding. To many, this may sound insufficient. When standing amid the rubble of a shattered life, philosophical or theological explanations can feel artificial. There is something almost instinctive in the protest. If God truly loved me, he would not have allowed this. This protest itself, however, contains a profound truth. We know, at a deep level, that love desires the good of the beloved. The struggle lies in reconciling this conviction with the experience of suffering. Different religious traditions offer different degrees of explanation, but most converge on a few key affirmations: that human freedom is real and can be used for both good and evil, that the world is still in process, not yet brought to its final harmony, that suffering, while never good in itself, can become a place where love is purified, character is formed, and compassion is deepened. None of these affirmations compel belief, but they open a space in which the question, "Where is God?" can be explored without the premature conclusion that he must be absent or indifferent. In that space, another possibility emerges: that God is at work in ways that do not always match our expectations, and that his primary concern is not to spare us from every hardship, but to lead us into a deeper life. One that includes joy, certainly, but also courage, patience, and a love that has passed through the crucible of difficulty. In the first part of this reflection, we have lingered primarily on the question itself, the experience of God's apparent absence, and the possibility of a hidden presence that accompanies us in the darkest seasons. This prepares the ground for a second movement. If God is indeed near when everything falls apart, how can we become more aware of that presence? How can we respond to suffering in a way that allows it to shape us, rather than crush us? And what does it mean, in practical terms, to walk with God through the ruins of a life that no longer looks anything like what we had planned? In what follows, we turn more directly to the path forward, to the attitudes, practices, and perspectives that can help us perceive and respond to God's presence precisely when our world has collapsed. If the first part has been about naming the darkness, the second part will be about discovering, step by step, how light can begin to shine within it. When a life has been shattered by loss, betrayal, illness, or failure, any talk of moving forward can seem premature, even insensitive. The first and perhaps most essential step is simple but demanding: to allow ourselves to be exactly where we are, without rushing toward easy answers. God does not ask us to pretend. The spiritual journey does not bypass the human heart, it passes through it. That means that grief must be grieved, anger acknowledged, confusion faced honestly. To stand before our own reality without disguising it is itself a courageous act, and it is often in this posture of truthfulness that the first quiet movements of God's consolation can be perceived. There is a profound dignity in the person who refuses to anesthetize the pain with distractions, addictions, or denial, and who instead chooses to confront reality in its starkness. This dignity does not come from self-sufficiency. It often coexists with great weakness and fragility. It comes from a fundamental alignment with truth. Paradoxically, such sincerity opens the door to a deeper experience of God, because God, as the Christian and many other traditions affirm, meets us not in fantasies about our lives, but in the real circumstances in which we find ourselves. If we want to know where God is when everything collapses, we may need to begin by stepping fully into our own collapse without disguise. Alongside this interior honesty, another movement becomes possible: the decision, however small, to remain in relationship with God, even if only at the level of a question. This does not mean feeling pious or reciting elaborate prayers. It may be as simple as saying, "I do not understand." If you are there, I need you, and repeating that in the quiet spaces of each day. In spiritual terms, this is often more significant than it appears. It is a refusal to cut off the relationship completely, a willingness to keep the line of communication open, however faint. Many who have done this testify that, over time, their prayer, initially nothing more than a desperate cry, gradually deepened into an authentic encounter with a God who listened, even when he did not explain. Practical expressions of this continued relationship can take many forms. Reading a short passage of a sacred text each day and sitting in silence afterward. Writing a letter to God in a journal, expressing doubts, fears, and hopes. Visiting a place of worship, not necessarily to participate in every ritual, but simply to sit in the stillness and allow the heart to breathe. None of these practices guarantee a particular feeling or outcome. They are not techniques for forcing God's hand. Rather, they are concrete ways of holding ourselves in a posture of availability, of saying, I am here, and if you are here, I wish to be open to you. Another crucial dimension of discovering God's presence in times of collapse is the recognition that God often reaches us through other people. When we are hurting, the instinct can be to withdraw, to isolate, to retreat into a private space where no one can see our vulnerability. This instinct is understandable, but if we follow it completely, we may be cutting ourselves off from the very channels through which God wishes to comfort and strengthen us. A compassionate friend, a wise counselor, a supportive community. These are not mere human comforts. They can become sacraments of a hidden grace, tangible signs of a love that comes from beyond us and yet is mediated through human presence. Studies in psychology and resilience consistently show that those who weather severe adversity with the greatest degree of healing and growth are not necessarily the strongest or most self-sufficient, but those who are willing to seek and accept support. This observation, while empirical, aligns closely with the spiritual claim that we are not created to walk alone. We are made for relationship, with one another and with God. When everything collapses, asking for help is not a failure of faith or courage, it is an expression of both. It is a way of saying, I was never meant to carry this alone, and opening ourselves to the possibility that God may answer our cry through the hands, words, and presence of others. At the same time, suffering can also awaken in us a new sensitivity to the suffering of others. Even as we receive support, we may find ourselves drawn to accompany others in their trials, not because our own pain has been fully resolved, but precisely because it has taught us something about fragility and compassion. In this way, a mysterious exchange takes place. The wounds we bear, instead of closing us in upon ourselves, become doors through which empathy flows. We begin to realize that we are part of a larger human story, that our collapse is not unique, and that we can participate in a network of mutual support where each one's burden is, in some measure, carried by all. In the light of faith, this mutual bearing of burdens can be seen as participation in God's own way of being present in the world. If God chooses to be near the brokenhearted, as many sacred texts affirm, then every act of genuine compassion becomes an instrument of that divine nearness. When we sit beside a grieving friend, listen without judgment, offer practical help, or simply remain present in silence, we are not only expressing human kindness, we are allowing something of God's own tenderness to become visible. And when others do the same for us, we receive not only their support, but a glimpse of a love that is larger and more enduring than any one relationship. There remains, however, the difficult question of meaning. Is it possible to find meaning in what has happened, without trivializing it? The answer is neither simple nor uniform. For some, certain experiences will always remain, at one level, inexplicable. Yet even when a definitive explanation remains out of reach, many find that, over time, they are able to weave their suffering into a larger narrative, not by denying its pain, but by integrating it into a broader understanding of their life and identity. They might say, "I would never have chosen this, and I still do not understand why it happened. But I can see that it has shaped me in certain ways. It has made me more patient, more compassionate, more aware of what truly matters." Research on post-traumatic growth suggests that, while trauma can be devastating, it can also, in many cases, lead to deeper relationships, a greater appreciation of life, a reordering of priorities, and a strengthened sense of personal resilience. From a purely secular perspective, this can be seen as an expression of the human capacity to adapt and find meaning in adversity. From a spiritual perspective, it can also be understood as one of the ways God works quietly within our history, not causing the suffering, but meeting us there and drawing forth new possibilities that would not have emerged otherwise. To see our story in this way requires time, patience, and a willingness to trust that life is not merely a random sequence of events, but part of a larger tapestry whose full pattern we cannot yet see. It involves a shift from asking only "why did this happen?" to also asking "what can come from this?" or "how am I being invited to live in the midst of this?" These questions do not cancel the first, they accompany it. But they open space for creativity, for growth, for a collaboration with grace. In this collaboration, God is not a distant spectator but a quiet co-worker, inviting us to take the next step, however small, toward greater wholeness. Ultimately, the most profound answer to the question, "Where is God when everything collapses?" is not conceptual but personal. It is not found primarily in arguments, but in an encounter. People who have suffered deeply and yet emerged with a living faith often describe not a theory that satisfied all their intellectual problems, but a sense, gradual, sometimes fragile, yet unmistakable, that they were not abandoned. They speak of moments when, in prayer or in silence, in nature or in the face of another person, they were overcome by a peace that did not match their circumstances, by a hope that did not arise from mere optimism, by a love that seemed to embrace them from within and beyond. For them, God's reality became less an abstract proposition and more a presence that could be trusted, even when nothing else could be. This does not mean that their questions disappeared or that they would have chosen the path that led them there. It means that, in the very place where everything seemed to fall apart, something new began to be built, a relationship grounded not in the assurance of constant comfort, but in the conviction that they were seen, known, and loved in the depths of their brokenness. Such a relationship does not remove suffering from human life, but it transforms its horizon. It allows us to face even the most difficult realities with a courage that does not originate in ourselves alone. In the end, to say that God is present when everything collapses is an invitation rather than a conclusion. It is an invitation to keep asking, seeking, and knocking, to bring the fullness of our experience, including our anger and doubt, into the space of prayer, to allow others to accompany us, to remain open to the possibility that, in ways we may not yet perceive, we are being held. It is an invitation to discover that faith is not a fragile illusion that shatters at the first touch of suffering, but a path that passes through suffering and emerges on the other side with a deeper, quieter strength. There will always be aspects of this mystery that surpass our understanding. Yet perhaps it is enough for now to take hold of one simple assurance, that when everything else falls away, plans, certainties, even our own sense of control, there is a presence that does not fall. We may not always feel it. We may sometimes doubt it. But to lean, even slightly, in the direction of that presence is already to begin to answer our own question. For in that leaning, in that small act of trust amid the ruins, God is not only present, He is at work, slowly and patiently transforming collapse into the beginning of a new and unexpected life.